Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain. And we always have some mighty fine yain. Singing Simchat Le'olam, Kol HaYiladim now. Simchat to the dogim in the deep blue sea. Simchat to you and me.
Welcome to the Haftarah Plethora video podcast, where we might not bring joy to the world, but we do talk about Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and all the prophets.
And now we actually get to talk about a story, the birth of Samuel.
Indeed we do, Rick. After 10 consecutive weeks of poetry and prophecy, you get to chant and I get to discuss a narrative story. A nice change of pace and a real treat. Anyway, I'm Larry Herman. No wine today, but talking Haftarah with my friend, my very good friend, the king of cantillation, Rick Muller. Hi, Rick. Are you ready for the new year?
Ready? Are you kidding? I'm ready for a new decade, which the new year 5781 really is. I'm desperate for some better days.
How true. And that's exactly what this story is about. It's the story of Hannah, the barren wife of Elkanah, praying for better days for herself, and whether she knows it or not, for her people. A narrative story followed by a song, or a psalm, or a poem of praise. And we'll get there, but Rick, first I have a short poem, or a limerick, of my own that I'd like to start. Do you want to hear it?
Do I have a choice?
Not really. Okay, here goes. There once was a man named Elkanah, who loved his barren wife Hannah. She wept and vowed to the Lord that her prayers not be ignored, thus the birth of her son was nirvana.
Very good, very good. That's the story in a nutshell.
Well, not quite, but it is what the biblical translator and commentator Robert Alter calls an annunciation story, a story that follows a biblical and ancient literary convention to explain a special birth. Samuel's mother, Hannah, like so many of our matriarchs, is both much loved by her husband and barren, making the eventual birth of her son, and it's always a son, very special, telling us that this child will be a leader of our historical narrative.
True. And it's also the third time that we're reading from the very beginning of a book of the prophets. We read from the beginning of Jeremiah in the first Haftarah of admonition, and from the beginning of Isaiah in the third Haftarah of admonition.
That's right. And we'll read from the beginning of Joshua on Simchat Torah, the beginning of First Kings for Chaya Sarah, Malachi for Toldot, Obadiah for Vayishlach, and the beginning of Ezekiel for Shavuot.
Hey, and don't forget about the beginning of Jonah for the afternoon of Yom Kippur. I'm reading that one this year. Of course, we read the entire book then.
Sorry, I forgot about Jonah. But I guess our sages like the beginning of books of the prophets. In any case, it's an interesting question why our sages chose this particular story to read on Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the new year. Do you have any ideas about that?
Sure. Like you said, Hannah was looking for better days ahead, and she made a vow and prayed to God to grant her wish, just like we all do at this time of year.
I like that. And of course, we hope that all of our prayers for the new year will be answered just as Hannah's was. Rick, I noticed that the Haftarah starts off with some pretty formulaic texts, but some pyrotechnics in the trope. Do you want to address that for us?
Sure. The very first verse has 5 unusual trope or trope combinations. It starts with a Tilisha Ketana, followed by your favorite, Kadma V'Azla, on Ish Echad. This one man gets all the emphasis. This man is special. Then we have one of the rarest tropes, the Pazer, over the word for his name, Ushmo. And then that's followed by a Tilisha Gedolah, a Darga, and a Tavir, which is a great combination over the name, his name and the father, his name of his father and the grandfather. So it gets the attention of the congregation. it wakes them up at the beginning of the story.
But it's not over the names of his great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather.
Well, I guess there's a limit to greatness.
Rick, why don't you chant the beginning of the Haftarah, the story of Elkanah and his wife Hannah, up through verse 8. It basically sets the stage for the rest of the story.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Vayehi ish echad min haramatayim Sofim mehar Ephraim ushmo Elkanah ben Yerocham ben Elihu ben Tochu ben Suf Ephrati velo shtei nashim shem achat Chana v'shem hashenit Pnina v'yehi lifnina yeladim ulchana ein yeladim ve'ala ha'ish ahu me'iro miyamim yamima lishtachavot B'lizboach l'Adonai tzvaot b'Shilo v'sham shnei v'nei Eli chofni u'finchas kohanim l'Adonai v'yihi hayom v'yizbach Elkanah v'natan lifnina ishto ulechol baneha uvnoteha manot ulchana yitein mana achat apayim ki erchana Ahev v'Adonai sagar rachmah v'chi asata saratach gam ka'as ba'avur hareimah ki sagar Adonai be'ad rachmah v'chen yaseh shana v'shana midei alotach beveit Adonai ken tachisena vativke velo tochal vayomer lach Elkanah ishach Chana lame tivki velame Lo tochli velame yera levavech alo anochi tov lach me'asara banim.
Fantastic. You know, Rick, I love that. The words are simple enough that you can actually understand it if you know a little bit of Hebrew just following along. So now we get to the most dramatic scene. Hannah goes to Shiloh, which in those days was the site of the Mishkan and the home of the priests. She makes a vow, one that I'm sure is resonant to many, if not all, readers of the Haftarah. She makes a deal with God. If God will grant her a child, she will dedicate the child to God. This is in verse 11. Anything special about that verse?
Yes, it begins with a dramatic double kadma v'azla over the words Vatidor neder, and Adonai tzvaot. So she vowed a vow and said Adonai tzvaot, but her petition is then chanted rather calmly.
Yes, indeed. And this is in stark contrast to how it's perceived by the priest Eli, who accuses her of drunkenness because her lips move without sound. But she also answers him calmly, explaining her anguish. It's only after he's assuaged by her answer and expresses his own hope that God answers her prayer that she introduces any trope drama.
Exactly. Verse 18 begins with Vatomer timtsa shivchatcha chen benecha, and then she leaves again calmly.
Exactly. She and Elkanah go back to their home, do what married couples do, and voila! She conceives and gives birth to a son that she named Samuel. Rick, time to chant through verse 20.
Vatakom Chana acharei ochla v'shilo ve'acharei shato ve'eli hakohen yoshev ala kisei amezuzat Echal Adonai vehi marat nafesh vatipalel al Adonai uvacho tivke vatidor neder vatomar Adonai tzvaot imra'o tir'eh bo'oni Amatecha uzchartani v'lo tishkach et amatecha v'natata la'amadcha zera anashim untativ l'Adonai kol yamei chayav umora lo ya'ale al rosho v'haya Ki hirbata lehipalel lifnei Adonai ve'eli shomer et piha v'chana hi medaberet al libach rak sfateha naot ve'kolach lo yishamea Vayachshaveha Eli l'shikora Vayomer elecha Eli Ad matai tishtakarin Asiri et yenech me'alayich Vata'an chana vatomer Lo Adoni Ishak sharuach anochi biyain v'shechar lo shatiti va'eshpoch et nafshi lifnei Adonai al titein et amatcha lifnei bat beliyal ki merov sichi v'chasi dibarti adheina vaya'an Eli vayomer lechi l'shalom ve'Elohei Yisrael yitain et she'elatech asher sha'alt me'imo vatomer timtsa shivchatecha chen be'enecha vatelech haisha ledarkach vatochal ufaneha lo hayu lah od vayashkima vaboker vayishtachavu lifnei Adonai vayashuvu vayavo'u el beitam haramata vayeda Elkanah et Chana ishto vayizkereha Adonai vayihi litkufot hayamim vatar Chana ותלד בן, ותקרא את שמו שמואל, כי מאדוני שאילתיו.
Rick, the last verses of chapter 1 finish the initial narrative. Hannah keeps the child at home until he's weaned, takes him with the appropriate sacrifices to Shiloh, and reminds the priest Eli of their previous meeting. For me, the interesting thing is the word that she uses when she tells Eli that she's lending her son to Adonai. That's a translation that a lot of commentators use. She uses the Hebrew word hish'il tihu. Some commentators think that this story was actually about Shaul and not about Samuel. Do you have any thoughts about this section?
Well, yeah, that would go along with the word Shaul right there, used in a different form, but who Shaul is right there in verse 28 after hish'il tihu. So the author is definitely playing with that root, Sha'alti, and then hish'il tihu, and then Shaul right there.
Interesting. Beyond my competency in terms of Hebrew to be able to comment any more on it, but it is an interesting aspect of the Haftarah. So let's hear the end of chapter 1, verses 21 through 28.
Vaya'al ha'ish Elkanah b'chol beito lizboach l'Adonai et zevach hayamim v'et nidro v'chana lo alata ki amra le'ishah ad yigamel hana'ar v'haviotiv v'nir'ah et penei Adonai v'yashav sham ad olam v'yomer lach Elkanah ishah Asi hatov b'einayich shvi ad gomlech oto ach yakem Adonai et dvaro vateshev haisha vatenek et benach ad gomlach oto Vata'alehu imach ka'asher gemalatu befarim shlosha ve'efa achat kemach ve'nevel yain vatvi'ehu vet Adonai Shiloh ve'hana'ar na'ar Vayishchatu et hapar, vayaviu et hana'ar el Eli, vatomer bi Adoni, che nafshecha Adoni, ani ha'isha, הנצבת עמך בזה להתפלל אל אדוני. אל הנער הזה התפללתי, וייתן אדוני לי את שאלתי, אשר שאלתי מאמו, וגם אנוכי השאלתיהו לאדוני כל הימים אשר היה הוא שאול לאדוני, וישתחו שם לאדוני.
Beautiful. Rick, I love listening to your chanting of the Haftarah, not only the trope, the musicality of the trope, but also the pronunciation. And I'm just reminded as I'm listening, the word that's used for Shmuel is Na'ar. It seems to have some echoes of the word Na'ar, which are used in two other very famous stories. The story of the Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac, he's called a Na'ar, but also Ishmael is also called a Na'ar. So,
and Joseph too.
And
Na'ar. Nar to his brothers, yeah.
And I'm sure there are many commentaries, and we could make up interesting midrashim on those connections. But we're running out of time, so I'll be brief regarding Chana's poem that take up the first 10 verses of chapter 2, essentially interrupting the narrative, which resumes in verse 11. And we didn't mention to people the page numbers. I'll say now that the Haftarah is found on page 1224, the commentary, and then starts on page 1225 of Eitz Chaim. And you won't find the continuation, but if you go to your Tanakh and you look up the beginning of Shmuel, of Samuel, you'll see that if you take out the poem, the narrative just goes on. So we've got this poem, which doesn't refer specifically to Chana's experience. It does mention the barren woman who bears 7 in verse 5, but that doesn't really fit our story. Robert Alter suggests that this poem was actually taken from another source and inserted here as a general psalm or poem of praise to Adonai. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Nothing other than, because I'm thinking about Jonah, the core of Jonah, I've heard, was the prayer inside the fish. When he's entangled by his depression in the bottom of the sea, the belly of the fish. Before that, he was in the bottom of the boat. So I've heard when I was at the UJ that the core of that story is the prayer with inside the fish.
And sometimes these different parts are inserted, and who knows, but that sounds like something we can talk about next week if we talk about the Haftarah for Jonah on Yom Kippur Mincha. Anyways, Rick, take us home with your chanting of Chana's poetic prayer of thanksgiving, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10.
Vatipalel Chana vatomar alat libi b'Adonai Rama karni b'Adonai Rachav pi al oyevai Ki samachti bishuatecha Ein kadosh kadonai Ki ein biltecha Ve'ein sur keloheinu Al tarbu tidabru Givoha Yetze atak mipichem Ki el deot Adonai Velo nitkenu alilot Keshet giborim chatim V'nichshalim azru chayil Sveim balechem niskaru Urevim chadelu Ad akara yalda shiv'a Verabat banim umlala Adonai meimit umchayeh Morid sheol vayal Adonai morish umashir Mashpil af meromeim Mekim me'afar dal me'ashpot yarim evyon lahoshiv im nedivim v'chisei chavod yanchilem ki l'Adonai metzu ke'eretz vayashet alehem tevel raglei chasidav yishmor urshaim b'choshech yidamu kilo v'choach yigbar ish Adonai yechatu merivav alav bashamayim yareim Adonai yadin afse aretz Viten oz Lemalko Veyarem Keren Meshicho.
Beautiful, Rick. I'm reminded in verse 8 you read, Mekim Be'ar Fardal, reminiscent of a line of one of the Psalms that we read during Hallel, if I'm not mistaken. In any case, that's all we have for this week. We wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, a Shana Tova, Mituka.
Yep. Sweet New Year.
And we'll hope to see you next week.
Next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.